Niamh from JJ Corry joining us shortly, who is indeed Irish, and it was very much set out that at the end of this, the message is, the remit is, the law is straight to the pub.
Yeah, within 5 minutes from
within
finishing.
5 minutes, absolutely. So I want to know, I mean, how are you guys all celebrating St. Patrick's Day? Welcome along. Hopefully we're live and everyone can hear us. Shout out.
Yes, lots of happy St. Patrick's Days. Wow, there's loads here. Sorry, I just was this from the last tasting? There's tons of comments already.
I think this is late with our little welcome.
I think this must be before, otherwise you're very quick typers. Ian Jambo Rain cannot wait to crack open these two. Have very high hopes for both. Jeff's just started with a Teeling this evening. Great shout. Malcolm Tuck, evening all. Alistair Taff, nice, Jeff. So I finished a Teeling a few weeks ago, trying to resist opening the other one. Ooh. Absolutely, Uncle Banya, Teeling for me too. Single grain 13-year-olds. Christy, I feel like that would be right up your street.
Oh yes, love it. Love me a grain. Love me a grain.
Pesho, I got a nice one from Whiskey Me. We should mention them. Kristen Randall, happy St. Patrick's Day, one and all. Jim Brannigan, treating myself to writer's tears as on offer at Waitrose. Reverend Wright, happy St. Patrick's Day from Somerset. I was going to do the accent there. I'm really sorry, but then bailed out on it in the last second. So may have been like a kind of mishmash of accents there. David Stanton, evening and a happy St. Patrick's Day to you all. Joe F, evening all. Pesho, happy St. Patrick's Day from Cumbria. Simon Smith, happy St. Patrick's Day. Lots of people looking forward to St. Patrick's Day. Mike Pizarro, Red 5 standing by. My dingle is in the glass. Repeat, dingle in the glass.
Jared, you've been had there potentially.
Definitely, that's a real Seymour Butts moment. So
it was good work.
Jim Brannigan, only dingle I've had before. Al Sutton.
Yeah.
Good evening from Edinburgh, Eddie Marshall. Looking forward to tasting some Irish whiskey on St. Paddy's Day. Al Sutton waking up the palate with Drums Shanbo single pot still. Great shout.
Good work, folks. Good work. So I suppose we should let people know how this works. If we have some new subscribers tuning in. So welcome. If this is your first live tasting, even more of a welcome to you and a double happy St. Patrick's Day. So how it works, Andy and myself, twice a month on a Thursday, we basically have a gather and share a dram and have a chinwag about some whiskey. And it is wonderful. And we have guests. We have drams galore, and we want to hear from you. So we want to know your tasting notes. We want to know any questions you have. We want to hear your questions for our guest, who tonight is Niamh from JJ Corry, as I mentioned earlier. And yeah, we just have a great time. This is a whiskey club for everybody. We don't care if you've never tasted whiskey before. We don't care if you've tasted 10,000 whiskeys. Everyone is welcome. And we just, all have a chat and have a dram, and it's wonderful.
Please get involved. That's the absolute crux of it. We just love to engage with you guys. We love reading out your tasting notes. Please, if you are new, do not be scared. The community are very welcoming here, the regular pour and sippers, and we love to read out your tasting notes. And so do our guests, to be honest. I think they love hearing your tasting notes. So please read them out. If you have any questions, please ask them, no matter how stupid you think they might be. Please just ask them to us.
Exactly. It's the age-old thing. There is no such thing as a stupid question. That actually isn't. And it's always good. It's always wonderful for us just to have an excellent conversation and a wonderful time. I also want to say, if you do love your drams, there is the Pour and Sip Members Club with juicy discounts on all of the delicious whiskies. So check that out if you're particularly taken. And then what we do, so we give you a little run of show. We're going to kick off with JJ Corry, which is extremely exciting. It's another Pour and Sip exclusive, which is amazing. So you cannot get this dram anywhere else except in this box this month, which is super special, and in the members store. So we'll talk all about whiskey bonding with Niamh because it's fascinating. But this is a whiskey that Team Master of Malt blended with JJ Corry just for us, and it's so exciting. And I cannot wait to get stuck into it and just geek out about it, which is very cool. Wow. And then Andy, over to you to have a chat with us about Dingle.
About Dingle, yes, absolutely, and possibly a bit about Irish whiskey in general.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like we should probably bring our guest for the night in. I'm so excited to zip Niamh in. Here she is. Hi, Niamh. How are you doing?
Hello. How are you? Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Happy St. Patrick's Day. I'm really overexcited. I should probably calm it down.
I'm way too giddy right now. I just can't believe it. Like doing events, doing tastings, and there is just something about St. Patrick's Day. It just makes you feel like you're invincible. Being Irish is the best thing ever.
Yes. Yeah, great. I'm happy to be here with you guys. Otherwise, I'd be at real work playing Galway Girl right now, probably, or some other Patrick's Irish song I don't want to play.
That is a solid choice. Galway
You
Girl
think?
is a solid
Okay.
choice. I approve.
So, the Ed Sheeran version, which I, best
You should say. For anyone very confused right now, Andy's day/night job is a musician, so he doesn't just walk around singing "Galway Girl" for fun. He'll be playing it for everyone coming into his bar.
London. Just along the streets of London.
Just everyone
on
streets of
St. Patrick's Day. Yeah. Anyway.
I'll say, on that note, we'll zip you off and you can listen to all of your tunes to your heart's content, but we'll see you again in a bit.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh, fantastic. So, oh my goodness, I feel so lucky to have you with us tonight because it's a Pour and Sip exclusive. You're going to tell us all about it. And you are a fabulous person in whiskey because, I don't know, JJ Corry has been making waves for a little while, and I feel like it's a brand that really has brought Irish whiskey bonding back into the mainstream. But before we get into that, tell us a bit about you. Who are you? What do you do in whiskey? And yeah, tell us a bit about JJ Corry as well.
Okay, cool. So my name is Niamh, and I have been working with JJ Corry for over 3 years now, which is insane. So I got into drinks really randomly. I had graduated from college, and in Ireland, there is this fantastic international graduate program for food and drinks companies.
Ooh.
So a friend of mine that I was in university with was working in Boston for another Irish whiskey distillery. And I was talking to him, we were catching up, and he said, "You really need to apply to this grad program because I feel like it could be a bit of you." So I just said, look, what have I got to lose? Research the companies that were on like the next incoming round of interviews.
Yeah.
And I came across JJ Corry. I had never heard of JJ Corry before. It was a brand new baby whiskey company.
Yeah.
And the more I dug deeper, I learned that it was based in West Clare. I live very close to West Clare.
Amazing.
Found out about Louise, who is an absolute boss, anarchist, trailblazer. And also there was something about Louise being a farmer's daughter, and I'm a farmer's daughter.
Oh.
And I just have so much respect for, being able to make something from scratch. And I live in a really rural agricultural community, and I'm not the best farmer, but I've a massive respect for the industry. And I just felt a huge amount of synergy for JJ Corry. And luckily, after a bunch of interviews, that's how I started off in the role. So I was not a big whiskey aficionado or anything like that, Christy. Like, I knew the beer mechanics. I loved a glass of paddy. My mom makes the worst Irish coffee, but it's also the best Irish coffee.
Oh my gosh, mums are always like that with cooking and drinks, I think.
Yeah, it's like you grew up with it and that's what you love. So I had massive interest and respect for the industry. And just like I'm sure all you guys know, once you go down the rabbit hole of whiskey, you're done. Like, that is it. You're in for life. So 3 years later, it's been so exciting working for, a company that's very much the new guard of Irish whiskey. So maybe should I talk a bit more about whiskey bonding?
Yes, please. So I was going to say, we mentioned Louise before we get into whiskey bonding. So the JJ Corry founder, I mean, the brand is like really steeped in history. I feel like it's a story that Louise, coming back to Ireland to kind of like her roots, found this amazing like historic figure and then ran with it.
That's it. So Louise had been working in drinks for the guts of 20 years for multinationals like Pernod, Diageo, Moet Hennessy. And in 2013, she quit. She was done with corporate life.
Too much.
She was like, mic drop, I'm out of here. Okay. And she moved back to her family farm in West Clare. And it had always been her dream to open up her very own grain to glass distillery, because back in 2013, looking at the craft whiskey movement in America, that would have been the innovative thing to do in Irish whiskey.
Yeah.
So Louise was researching the local history of the area, because in West Clare, there was both a lot of legal and illicit distilling throughout, the generations.
Yeah.
And she discovered an old whiskey label from a whiskey bonder named JJ Corry. And when she saw the word bonder, Louise had never heard this in the context of Irish whiskey. And when she dug deeper and learned about JJ, his life, his business, it just set off fireworks in her brain. And there and then she said she was going to resurrect this tradition, because whiskey bonding used to be such a commonplace practice and a thriving subcategory of whiskey production in Ireland. And it simply means that many distilleries focused on the distillation of Irish whiskey. And they relied on these middlemen, whiskey bonders, to take the whiskey wholesale from them, put it into cask, mature the whiskey, blend it, and then bring the product to market.
Yeah.
So you had two kind of styles of whiskey bonders back in the day. You had fellas in Dublin that ran huge commercial operations, and their goal was to pump the USA and the Commonwealth with Irish whiskey. But then at the other side of the spectrum, you had these teeny tiny rural whiskey bonders who would have been publicans and grocers. And, JJ Corry, to get his casks, he would have rocked down to the docks in our local town, and he had rum casks from Jamaica, port, sherry, Saint Julien, Bordeaux casks, and he matured his whiskey in these barrels. And, in the 1890s in Ireland, that was pretty an exotic flavor profile to be offering up to your local customers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I guess when Louise uncovered all of this, you can almost see it come to life. It's such a vibrant story and such a vibrant way to make whiskey. And so that's what we're doing now.
Exactly. So I want to ask you a little bit more about whiskey bonding and the process, and then we'll get on to this whiskey because it all feeds in together. So I've been lucky enough to come out and visit you guys in Ireland a couple of times. And my fondest memory is that moment when you walk into your warehouse there and you just see rows upon rows of casks, and they're all different shapes and all different sizes, and there's all different kinds of spirit in them, and they're all different kinds of ages. I was just wondering, at what point when you joined JJ Corry were you like, wow, this is like a treasure trove? And how did you get into sort of the whiskey bonding and the history of those casks specifically?
So it's kind of a funny story. So the first whiskey that I ever tasted, so when I went into the rack house for the very first time, the thing that overwhelms you the second you go in the door is the fragrance.
Yes, absolutely.
And to describe it to you guys, so in our rack house, there's a little side door, and you open it up and it's literally, you are met with a wall of these incredible scents and smells from the cask. I had never experienced anything like it before. And it sounds kind of corny, but it felt like really romantic and really cool. And I remember Louise was showing me around the rack house, and she was like, this is, where we keep our coconut casks, our vanilla casks, our green apple casks. And she was like, and that corner is smoky bacon. And I was like, smoky bacon
and whiskey?
I was like, I cannot compute. What does this mean? So the smoky bacon cask that she rocked up to was a 28-year-old single malt, dunked in the whiskey thief, poured me a glass, and hook, line, and sinker, I was like, I am now indoctrinated into the cult of JJ Corry.
Oh my gosh.
So I guess that is it's kind of a nerdy detail, but it's one really cool thing about the rack house. We categorize everything by flavor, and that's really fun, because when you're doing side-by-side tastings and seeing those little different varieties and differences between casks, because each cask is hyper individual.
Yeah.
That's where I guess you start to really hone your craft in a way and learn about the nuances and the different characteristics of the whiskey in the rack house. And I think that's one of the best things about being a whiskey bonder, is understanding like that art when it comes to the blend, you know?
It is so incredible. And that literally, in a nutshell, is the bonding process. You're not distilling anything. You're acquiring spirit at different stages of aging. Obviously, you're maturing it. And then that's where the artistry comes in, because you make something like we have here that is the sum of its parts. And it's amazing.
Absolutely. And, you know, Louise has just got incredible vision when it comes to how we acquire our liquid and our casks. So the way that we source our liquid as modern whiskey bonders is, first of all, we need old, rare, mature spirits. And they mainly come from distilleries like Bushmills and Cooley, because they're the only distilleries in Ireland that have that vast amount of stock available. And the other really cool thing that we do, and I feel like that's what we're most passionate about, is sourcing new make whiskey off of the new independent producers around Ireland, because our ultimate goal is to create this library of whiskey flavors.
Yes.
And Louise spends a huge amount of time sourcing casks. We don't work with brokers at all. Louise travels the world to ensure that we're getting grade A, juicy barrels from cooperages, bodegas, wineries all around the world. And we match our new make to these casks, because how we put our stamp and our flair onto our whiskies is how we shepherd it from cask to glass, in a sense. So a lot of time and energy is put into coordinating, I guess, the maturation process of all our whiskies.
Yeah, which is just so cool. I'm just going to read out some comments and then we'll get onto the whiskey itself, because it's St. Patrick's Day and I haven't had a sip yet, and that's just not okay. So I'm just we've got lots of people saying happy St. Patrick's Day. We've got a question for you, which I'll come back to at the end from Pat. Thank you for your question. A little quip from Malcolm Tucker: PNS member store, a danger to my wallet. Yes, I mean, it's very difficult to resist. We've got tasting notes. Joe F. Ooh, an instant hit of banana bread on the nose and mint tea. We've got a welcome to Mika, who says that one of his friends, I've lost where it was, is responsible for him joining. We're glad that you're here. Welcome aboard. We've got Green Tea is Green checking in, the Reverend checking in. We've got loads of people saying hello. So some tasting notes. We've got cinnamon, dried fruits and cookies from Real Boinga. We've got tangerines with vanilla and apples from Malcolm. Donatian, sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, is getting vanilla too. We've got apple crumble and caramel from David. We've got Panda Bear getting butterscotch. We've got so many. I'm just skimming over. Jeffster, marshmallow and summer fruits on the nose. The taste is like the best sweet in the sweet shop that you've ever found. That's all you've never found even. That's even better. We've got Reverend Kevin, certainly light and airy on the nose. Fresh sweet buttered apples and custard. We've got Anthony Mullins, hot apples with lashings of brown sugar. Reminds me of my mum's apple pie. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to get stuck in. And then we've got Jim, loved it neat, spicy apples. Water killed it for me and just dulled the flavours. So I think if you're going to add water, we'll have that as a note of caution. Don't do too much at once. Go steady with it. There's no shame in adding water to your whiskey, but do it gently. And then before we get onto the whiskey, Pat Cowling has asked, what is your go-to whiskey? The one you always have a bottle of and drink on a regular basis? That's a good question, I think.
That is such a good question. So I've two answers for that, because I feel recently, and don't shoot me for saying this, I've been kind of equating whiskey to how I drink wine. Okay.
Oh, I like this.
Sometimes I want a really bold, full-bodied red.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes I want a really crisp white. So my constant go-tos is when I want a really nice sipping whiskey, I drink the Gale out of our core range, which might seem a little bit cheesy to everyone, but that is the whiskey that taught me about Irish whiskey and made me learn and respect Irish whiskey. So that is always my go-to. But when I'm making Irish coffees, hot toddies, Powers whiskey all day, every day, because I just love that oily pot still vibe that it serves me up. It's consistent. It is there for you when you need it, and you can run down your local grocery store and pick it up. So
It's
they
amazing.
would normally be my go-tos.
That's a good answer. And actually, I think we kind of like need Andrew, obviously, Andy, our co-host, has said Springbank 10 always, because it always is. Andy's a Springbank geek through and through. St. Patrick's Day, Andy, come on.
That is bougie.
Very bougie. Okay, so do you keep your tasting notes coming in, everyone? We love them, and more questions the merrier. Let's get on to the dram literally in hand. So this is Lasog. I think I'm pronouncing it right.
You're almost there. Lasog. So
Lasog.
when you see a little accent above
Yeah.
a vowel in the Irish language, it means you just got to draw it out. So it's the Lasog.
Lasog. Excellent. That's good to know. I feel like we've all had a little lesson as well in language, which is also very handy and useful. Every day is a school day. And we were chatting a little bit earlier. So you guys actually blended this via Zoom, which to me seems like the hardest thing ever to do.
So hard. So normally when we're creating special bottlings, we nickname them Bonders blends.
Mhm.
So when we're making a Bonders blend, we normally invite you out to the farm, hand you the whiskey thief and say, have at it. And it's a super interactive process. But because of that little thing called COVID,
Oh, never
we had to Zoom like the rest of the world. So what we did during the panini was we worked with the pour and sip team.
Yeah.
And sounds not so exciting, but over email, we talked about flavor profiles and tried to kind of hash out what the vision of this blend would be. So once we had kind of aligned on what kind of direction we wanted to take the blend, we were able to go away into the rack house and develop 3 individual blends that could potentially work for this bottling. So then we shipped them over to the pour and sip team, and we jumped on a video call and we did a full-blown tasting where there was a load of over and back and let's try sample 1, but what about sample 3? Maybe we should taste 2 again. And until we finally landed on the final blend, which was the Lasog.
Which is amazing. And I think one of the things actually, we'll go on to whiskey in a minute, when I went over to blend with you and we made a whiskey called the Sonas, something that I really learned from you guys is when you proof a blend down, because obviously you're starting at cask strength, it's not just what flavors go together from different casks, it's about what ABV do they sit right at as well. And I had never thought about that before.
Absolutely. So ABV has a huge impact on flavor, because initially when we tasted those samples, they were all at cask strength and quite high cask strength. Actually, they were like up, I remember, in the range of like 55 to 57%.
Yeah.
So we tasted the Lasog at 50, but then consensus was at the end that it sat really beautifully at 46% ABV.
Yeah.
And in general at JJ Corry, when we're landing on a blend, we taste it from its cask strength all the way down to 40% to be sure that we're really happy with where the blend is sitting.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess I'm sure many other producers do that, but that's definitely one huge part of our process that we're really like meticulous about.
And I think it comes back to, we mentioned water earlier from one of the comments, like adding water to whiskey really does transform it. And there is never any shame in adding water to your whiskey. Like add a few drops, add a lot, whatever you want to do. Like when, as we said, when we're blending or bonding, water's key.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm sure all you guys know, whiskey is so subjective and flavor is so subjective. So drink it whatever way you like it, you know?
Exactly. Now, we're going to have a sip in a minute. We could talk for hours about whiskey. Indeed, we have, and it's always a joy. So this, I believe, is 40% grain, which, I love Irish single grain. It's fantastic. And 60% malt. Can you tell us any more than that, or is it all under wraps?
I know, of course. We're very transparent about our blends at JJ Corry. So 40% of the blend is 5-year-old grain ex-bourbon barrel. And then the remaining 60% is comprised of, so it's a lot of numbers, it's a lot of math I'm going to
We're ready.
So 40% of the blend, 5-year-old grain. Then 48% of the blend is 15-year-old malt, ex-bourbon cask.
Yeah.
And then the remaining 12% is 19-year-old malt, ex-bourbon cask.
Oh my goodness.
So it is quite an aged blend. And guys, when you get into the tasting, like there is so much complexity going on because these malts are derived from some of our Bushmill stocks, and they're just stunning. They're so complex. They're so beautiful. And yeah, I'm really excited to taste.
Let's have a taste. Let's have a little nose and taste. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. This is so creamy and green and cinnamon and apple, and it's making my mouth water, and it's so fresh. I love it. This is amazing.
So the creaminess, I have to say, like straight up, that 5-year-old parcel of grain that we put in this blend was whiskey that came to our farm as new make back in 2016.
Wow.
It fully matured in ex-Woodford Reserve barrels. And
amazing.
Those barrels were handpicked by Louise, and any grain coming out of those barrels has this insane butterscotch and cream mouthfeel, and it just adds so much body and length to every blend that we put them in. Like that always jumps out at me like immediately.
Oh my God, I am loving it so much. Okay, we've got some more questions coming, which is amazing. Thank you for your questions. I'm also we're running quite over time, but I'm fine with it. Hopefully Andy's fine. We'll bring him back in a bit. Thanks, Andy. So you mentioned tannin earlier. Andy's confirmed he's fine. That's good. He's got his whiskey. Of course he's fine.
Okay.
Peter Gilmore has asked, what is tannin? You mentioned tannin earlier.
So tannin is like that kind of mouthfeel that a red wine would give you. So it kind of like, it gives me like that kind of gritty texture in my mouth.
For me, it's almost like the clinginess of it. It's like the stuff that sticks to you a little bit. It's a really interesting way of just thinking about it. It's really good. Right, another question from Jim. What does it translate to from Gaelic? I think I'm pronouncing that right.
So it's really cute. Lasóg means little flame. So you know when you get a match and you like strike a match onto kindling, that small flame that's the beginning of a fire is specifically known as Lasóg.
Oh my gosh, that's so cute. And I have to ask, because obviously with the ones we've done before, the Sonas and other ones as well, I've been involved with naming them. Who named this one?
Me!
Yeah! Top work. I love it.
Thank you. So I know you guys love naming any of our collaborations that we've done together. They've been named after, you know, Irish things. So we did Anfa, Sonas, the Aron.
Yes.
And now Lasog.
Yeah.
And they're always so fun. And they really stretch me because at JJ Corry, we absolutely obsess over what we're going to call our whiskeys because we love every whiskey to be tied to like a really nice story. So I'm not gonna lie, I would be getting out old books from like university and going through like poetry books trying to find like really nice words to use for our blend. It's kind of insane.
I love it. Right, we've got so many questions. I realise I'm skipping over loads of tasting notes, but I'm loving your questions. So Beer Daddy has asked, and this is a great question. When you buy casks, do they come whole or in bits? And are they cleaned or do they still have remnants in them?
Ooh, good question. So they always come to the farm whole because the cooperages that we specifically work with, like these guys are like 3rd, 4th, 5th generation coopers. Like they're literally born with the tools in their hands and going at it. So when they come to the farm, they're in mint condition. So normally once a cask is disgorged in their country of origin, they're given the once over by the cooper to make sure everything's okay. Then they're literally put on a ship to Ireland, and they're on our farm within 6 weeks. And then once they reach our farm, our local cooper that we call on from up in Neffin, he'll come down, or we send them over to him, and he'll give them the once over just to make sure that there's no leaks or anything like that.
And that's amazing. And if anyone has ever seen a cooper at work, they are phenomenal. Absolutely.
Guys, get on YouTube, and it is just the most fascinating thing to watch.
It's great. Right, 2 more questions and then we'll move on, because I think everyone's running out of whiskey, which we cannot have on St. Patrick's Day. It's not acceptable. Well, I say everyone's run out of whiskey because they've drunk it all and really enjoyed it. So that's not so bad. Tom has asked, and I think you covered this a little bit earlier, but just to recap, do JJ Corry only stock barrels from Bushmills in their range, or do you experiment with other varieties too? So you have an enormous palette of whiskey, aged and new.
We do. So just to recap, all of our super aged spirit, like anything from 10 years up until like 30 years that we have on the farm, that's coming from distilleries like Bushmills and Cooley, because they're the only distilleries that have it. But we work with, over 13 other new independent distilleries to source new make from. And we have a variety of styles of whiskey on the farm. We've got malt, grain, pot still. We have some peated malt, some peated pot still maturing on the farm right now. So that's the amazing thing, because some of these new distilleries are, trying to carve out their own niche and, set their own path. And they're looking to old heritage mash bills and are creating some really, really interesting things. And it's really great as a bonder that, we can get a couple of casks of that from time to time.
Very, very cool. 2 quick fire questions, then we really will bring Andy back.
Okay.
How many times do you use the same barrel to make the whiskey?
Ooh, okay. So it really depends. Because every barrel has its own lifespan, I should say. So for an example, we disgorged a 22-year-old whiskey recently, and those casks are spent in the sense that if we were to put new make into them, there would be very, very influence happening. And at the end of 3 years, the whiskey would probably be the color of water. So those casks are sent to the little cask graveyard, and they're repurposed and reused for different projects. So it just depends. It really is like a case-by-case basis.
No, that's very cool. Thanks. That was a great question, Peter. And now we'll think about the little cooperage in the sky that all these wonderful barrels and casks go to. And then a very last one from Pesho, which is a great question as well. Are the casks still watertight after 6 weeks at sea?
Do you know what? You would be surprised. They would be, because the coopers are amazing. But always we get them checked over at our side of the pond just to make sure everything's cool. But it has happened in the past, because we rack everything on the bilge. I'll never forget one time, Louise says that she had gotten a new batch of casks into the farm, and she checked on them the next day, and the ground was wet.
No, the precious cargo.
I know, but no stress. We didn't lose that much liquid, but we thought we were cool. We weren't cool. The cooper came down, and it was fine after a few hours. But yeah, it's just one of those things you have to really keep an eye on, just to make sure that there's no leakages.
Yes. Oh my gosh, it's been such a joy. Thank you so much, Niamh, for answering everyone's questions. They've been coming in. It's amazing. And thank you for telling us all about Lasog. Hopefully I said that right this time.
You nailed it.
We're going to zip Andy back in as well at this point. As he took a mouthful of water. Sorry, I promise I didn't lie in wait. How did you like the Lasog? What a beautiful dram.
I loved it. I love listening to you guys as well. That was just so interesting, listening to all of that. But obviously that is a wonderful dram, and it's gone. So that's
I have like the tiniest bit left, and I'm sad.
I suppose so.
just one closing remark before we say bye for now. But Niamh, you're going to hang around to the end for another sort of like come back in 15 minutes or so. For any residual questions you've got, any burning questions, keep hold of them from this point. But Mike Pizarro, I don't know how I'm going to rank this month's box, but this is by a long way the best Irish whiskey I've had. So thank you for crafting it for us.
Awesome. We love to hear it. We aim to please. We aim to
Well, we'll kind of. I'm worried about you getting to your Guinness at the pub, so.
Yeah, so we'll move on for now, but we'll have you back in 10, 15 minutes or so.
All right.
Thank you so much, Niamh. Catch you in a bit.
Bye.
What a joy, Andy. What a joy.
What a joy. I felt so left out.
I'm so sorry. We should have just got you back in, just had a little party. It would have been the way to
I
do
was
it.
having a party here, just,
But it's all good. But I mean, we're over to you for this next dram. So in a way, you are our guest of honour for our second dram.
Well, what a treat for you all, to be honest.
I know. Andy is our sort of Dingle ambassador for the day, if I can say that.
I'm the Dingle ambassador. Well, I think it would actually be good, as it is Paddy's Day, and we're talking about Irish whiskey, it would be good to just give a little brief history and overview of Irish
whiskey. Give us a
whiskey.
history lesson, please.
Because in general, people don't think of Irish whiskey as kind of one of the first places we discovered whiskey, but it was. So they were one of the first distillers in the British Isles. And during the 19th century, Irish whiskey was widely compared to its Scotch counterpart, but it was before. So Dublin was the home of Irish whiskey, and is once seen as the capital of Irish whiskey. And the majority of whiskey producers were basically based in Dublin. And during the 19th century, during the peak of whiskey, it was accounting for about 60% of the world consumption of whiskey. So that
is phenomenal.
We don't really think of that when we think about Irish whiskey, that it was once so unbelievably popular and was basically whiskey, was all Irish and not Scottish. However, unfortunately, very sad times, there was a few events that kind of halted the growth of Irish whiskey and sent it into a complete decline. And the first was the 1916 Irish War of Independence, which resulted in the partition of the country, and a civil war which ran from 1919 to 1921. And there were trade embargoes imposed by the British Empire, so they couldn't export to the British Empire, which places like Canada and New Zealand. And then came the American Prohibition between 1920 and 1933. 13 years without legally being able to drink in the bars. I mean, can you actually believe it?
I cannot actually imagine. I mean, obviously over the pandemic, which we don't talk about, not being able to go to a pub or a bar for a few months was...
That's so Gen Z, isn't it? It's like, we did get to go to the pub for a couple of months during lockdown and the coronavirus. This was 13 years. But that effectively cut off all sales of Irish whiskey to the US, which was literally the biggest consumer of Irish whiskey. And they refused to send their products to America legally. So in doing so, they cut themselves off from their biggest consumers. And that allowed kind of fake Irish whiskey to flourish in the country. But the problem was that when it was reinstalled and you could export, the branding of Irish whiskey was just tarnished to a point that no one wanted to really touch it. And at that point, the final spanner came in the works, and that was Scotland. So in Ireland, they were using pot stills until a man called Coffey, who was an Irish exciseman.
We like this man. He's made a lot of a big impact.
He's made quite a big impact, and he invented a completely new type of still called the continuous still, which, as you all know, is like a column. And this was able to make the Scottish producers, the distilleries, produce a kind of cheaper and lighter style of whiskey and a blended whiskey. And this essentially was the final spanner in the works for Irish whiskey. And the Irish distillers rejected those developments of the coffee stills and not wanting to sacrifice those traditional flavours of Irish whiskey produced using a pot still. Now, the positive that came out of this was the formation of Irish distillers, which took place in about 1966, which, as you all know, was an amazing year for England because we won the World Cup. And this obviously occurred after the Easter Rising and Prohibition. And the industry still hasn't revived from the hardship of those earlier decades. And the three main distillers left in the south, so there was John Jameson's, John Power, and Cork distilleries, all merged to form Irish distilleries. And this was the only way that these three distilleries could survive all of these hardships. And the new distillery Middleton was born out of that, and as we know, they are still thriving today. Eventually, Irish distillers were bought by a French company called Pernod Ricard in 1988. We all know them. And since then, Irish whiskey has soared, exporting more than 7 million casks in 2015, and 1 million increase a year. New independent distilleries like Teeling, one of the first Irish whiskey new distilleries to be opened for 125 years in Dublin. I was there last week, an amazing place. So that kind of brings us on to where we are today in this absolute Irish whiskey boom. And it's kind of not stopping, which is a great thing. And that brings us on to Dingle, which we are looking forward to trying today. So Dingle's kind of ethos is artisan distillery, bringing and harking back to the traditional days of the production of Irish whiskey before all the hardships that it suffered. It was crafted and conceived by three independent distillers. So there was Oliver Hughes, Liam Lahart, and Peter Moseley, who were the people behind Porterhouse Brewing Company, which was formed in Ireland in 1996. Now, Dingle was launched in 2012, and it was purposely built, privately owned distillery to open, and it was the first one in 150 years in Ireland, and it represented a milestone in the history of distilling in Ireland. And it is the only distillery at present that exclusively produces and bottles its own whiskey. So we've been talking about whiskey bonding, but this is the first distillery in Ireland in recent times to produce their own whiskey. Now, obviously, that comes with quite a few issues. If you set yourself up in 2012, legally in Ireland, obviously, whiskey needs to be 3 years legally aged. But we discussed with maybe, if we think of Cardrona, who released in batches, they're growing wings, and it's up to the distillery whether they want to wait those 10 years to release their first product. We've spoken to distilleries who have done that. Dingle did a bit like Cardrona, and they're releasing their single malt in batches over the first few years in order to kind of make money. But this is the first of its core range, this Irish single malt from Dingle, and it's fully with their own whiskey. I think the whiskey inside of here is about 6-7 years old, which makes sense. We haven't got yet to the kind of 10-year-old stock. So kind of 6- and 7-year-old whiskey from their own distillery, and it's matured in 61% Pedro Jimenez casks and 39%. Sorry, first fill. My maths was quite bad there.
I mean, I'm very impressed. Very, very impressed. Like, this information is in your brain. Very, very impressive. So, Dingle is a distillery that I'm actually quite fascinated by, and I've not been out to visit, and I would really love to. And something that's really fascinating is that the master blender from Glenmurray, Graham, he was at Glenmurray and is now over at Dingle, which I think really shows a statement of intent from the distillery that they're recruiting like such experts from Scotland, people who've been distilling for years and years and years to come and take charge of these stills, which is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, so I mean, they've got a thing. I mean, this is, like I said, it's mostly Pedro Jimenez cast, which, from the colour, it's not exactly like a classic Pedro Jimenez colour, but then there's the 39% from the bourbon cask, which is first fill, which is actually a company ethos of using first fill bourbon casks. So we can make our own minds up, but we would hope to get more of those kind of vanilla notes and the caramel notes from the bourbon cask. So we will with the first fill bourbon cask. So shall we give this a nose and see what's going on?
I mean, I have to say, I have already dived straight in, so I'm afraid.
Great. So not only have I missed out on the first conversation, now I've been talking all this time, and I've missed out on this whiskey.
Gradually sipping away. I mean, in my defense, our pour and sippers have been like giving me all these tasting notes on my little screen here. So how could I refrain?
Tom Brannigan saying that it was 60% of the world consumption of whiskey, and obviously those world events impacted that. Do you know what percentage it is today? Did it ever get back to what it was? Today, actually, when I was at it, I can't remember the exact stat. You will have to look this up and maybe head to us in the Pour and Sip Digest. But it is an absolute fraction now of what that was. I mean, we're talking an absolute fraction.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk a little bit about this if you want to have a little sip. I'll let you. I'll take the reins for a second. I don't have the exact number to hand, but I do remember when I was at the spirits business, every year we'd do our brand champions, like very, very data, very like geeky, like report about brands of whiskey selling over 1 million cases. And I think from memory, there was only Jameson, maybe, I mean, Niamh will know this more than me, but I think that's the only Irish whiskey brand that sells so much. When you look at producers in India, and some of the big US producers, but by volume, India is by far, I think, the biggest whiskey producer, which is amazing because we just don't see a lot of these brands over here. It's really fascinating.
Absolutely. I mean, they drink the most whiskey, but then obviously a lot of their whiskey is produced in a different techniques using kind of molasses and things like that. So
yeah, for sure. But even some of the big brands that use grain, huge.
Yes. Yeah. We have Paul John on here before, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely.
And
I think, sorry?
And Amrit, I think we have.
And Amrit, yeah. But just to carry on a little bit before we get stuck into this, the Irish whiskey scene is growing so dramatically, but from such a small base. So we talk about, 40 plus distilleries in Ireland now. Most of these producers are doing maybe like low hundreds of thousands, maybe even less litres a year, whereas some of even a small distillery in Scotland might be doing like 1 million litres a year.
Yeah. Actually, I mean, the ethos again of Dingle is quality over quantity, so they're not interested in, as it currently stands, in expand. They're really interested in really rekindling those Irish traditions of, you know, of what an Irish whiskey is, and bringing out really quality whiskey. And they're not currently thinking about kind of these expansions, though they do produce vodka and gin there as well. That was actually something else I should mention.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Shall I read out some tasting notes where you have another little sip, and then we'll get geeky about this one? So very interesting. Again, I'll try and skip through some because there are so many coming in. Gareth, getting lots of berry and wild fruits on the nose. David, licorice and aniseed, a nice glass of Pernod, funnily enough, mentioned them earlier, as the parent company. Ian Jambo Rain, this is a bit very unusual on the nose. It smells a bit rubbery to me, tires. Chris Randall's getting spicy tangerine. We're getting iron brew on the nose for Anthony. Eddie Marshall, red berries, boiled sweets, and some honeycomb.
I love that really Scottish tasting note for the Irish whiskey, iron brew. That's great.
I know, it's excellent. David, Caramac bars, creme brulee, some spice. Niamh says she's shook. Which is excellent. So yeah, loads and loads and loads. Real boing, orange and ginger with a bit of cucumber to this. Joe F, definitely getting the bourbon cast on the palate, instantly with that sweet spice, more orange and a woody flavour to it, some darker chocolate on the end. We've got, Ionis is saying Amber, it was lovely, good memory there. And orange and cream finish from Real Boingo. I'm missing some out because there are so many. I
can't see where you are.
I've got to the bottom. I've skipped through.
Got to the bottom. She skipped right through.
I've skipped through. But yeah, so Andy, what are you getting on this? We've had some comments that there's a lot of creaminess going on in this box. And I think I agree, but that's kind of can be a bit of a style of Irish whiskey. It can be.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when we think of like that traditional pot still Irish whiskey, that kind of creamy porridge kind of nature that I often get from it as well. I think the creaminess as well on the palate as well, that huge kind of vanilla note that's there as well from the first full bourbon cask is quite strong. I think that the Pedro Jimenez cask to me aren't like majorly apparent, considering it is majority is Pedro Jimenez. It's not like a major like raisins or dried fruit note that you'd expect from those casks. It's really quite balanced. Again, on the nose, kind of bit of aniseed and licorice and kind of maybe some limes in there as well, kind of interesting stuff going on. And then the palate for me is quite creamy vanilla, little bit of Caramac. Does anyone remember that sweet?
Yes, we had Caramac mentioned just then from someone. That's such a good shout. Such a good shout. So Tom is talking leather and coffee. David, rhubarb and custard, boiled sweets and dried fruit. I absolutely love that. That's such a great tasting note.
I really get leather on this as well, on the nose for me. I think that's someone else with the burning tire kind of thing. It's definitely not like it's not an off-putting note for me at all. Someone mentioned rubber. It's not. For me, it's like that leather is quite apparent here, but it's really nice. I love it. Yeah,
I think for me, it's some of that, like the sort of sherry influence. Sometimes that can come through as like leathery, maybe a bit rubbery, occasionally a bit struck matchy. I think it adds like some really interesting depth to it.
That's what I'm saying. It's quite balanced as well. And yeah, you do get those kind of those sherry cast whiskies. I think something like a Kilkerran 8 or something like that is really rubbery kind of notes, and you really need to get used to that huge kind of dirty sherry malt. It's got a little bit of that in it, but it's balanced out quite nicely by the bourbon casks.
Indeed. And a very, very geeky remark from me. I'd be interested to know what condensers they're using, because sometimes if you have like a worm tub condenser rather than a shell and tube condenser, you can get some more of those like rubbery notes as well.
Yeah, I don't know where you got to, Christy, but like Bruce Ed was saying, is in my imagination, Irish whiskey is generally sweeter than Scotch, which is an interesting point. But yeah, I mean, typically Irish single pot still whiskey as well is quite light, and also a lot of Irish whiskey is triple distilled. How many Scotch distilled? I can only think of Auchentoshan.
Yeah, that's the only one I can think of. I'm sure other people are doing it, but they make a big thing about their triple distillation.
Yeah, absolutely, which gives that kind of much cleaner, more copper contact over the 3 distillations, and you get a much cleaner spirit.
Yeah, but obviously in the same way that not every Scotch whiskey distillery double distills, not every Irish distillery triple distills. So, but it's fascinating, and I love how all these traditions start in all these different places, and you have philosophies and traditions and ways of making whiskey that get passed down. And oh my goodness, I want to go and like just study whiskey and whiskey history for ages, and then all of these little intricacies come out, and it's just wonderful.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're talking about talking about JJ Corry and then talking about Dingle. We're talking about Irish whiskey, but two completely separate ends
Yeah.
of what a distillery can do. Nigel Gain, I've always enjoyed Irish whiskies for their smoothness. Joe F, it really is a citrus and red berry burst on the palate in a delicate way that's balanced with the spicy and tangy overtones. Joe F, lovely stuff, damn it. He's heading to the pour and sip shop. Your Uncle Vanya, I second that, Tom Brannigan. Leathery, woody, musty rubber, then vanilla and cream. Panda Bear, and tastes like burnt rubber at the petrol station, not really what I want from a beverage. Well, when you say things like that, obviously, like whenever I give tasting notes to any Islay whiskey in general, you go, oh, this is like hospital floor, TCP. You would never really associate that as wanting that to be in your drink, but there's something about whiskey in general that those kind of notes suddenly become quite appealing.
And you know what? I love it. I'm so pleased you said that, Panda Bear, because I feel like whiskey has such a broad spectrum of flavour. You've got the really light, airy, aromatic things at one end, maybe you're more single grains or maybe you're triple distilled. And then at the other end, you've got, this is really quite robust, I think, really quite, it's fairly pronounced. But even beyond that, as you mentioned, Andy, the Islay whiskies, and there's a wonderful, just, I don't know, prism of flavour in between, and it's just gorgeous.
Absolutely. Reverend Kevin Wright, creamy palate, coats the tongue. Your Uncle Vanya. Ah, that's it. Cast strength to kill Karen. Literally can't get better, honestly. Anyway, Jonathan Gumble, very good for such a young breed. Yeah. I mean, we've tried younger, by the way, from a new distillery, like with Cardrona. We've tried younger than this. I think that was at 4 years old, I think the Growing Wings wasn't it? Or just hatched. Can't remember which one it was.
Yeah, I mean, they have got a 3-year-old on the market too. I think we've had 3, 4. I have tasted 3, 4, and 5. I don't know if we've done 4 and 5 at Pour and Sip.
I can't remember. We're talking a while ago.
But they're baby whiskies.
Yes, that's exactly it. Baby whiskey. But we've spoken about this before when we've tried younger whiskey. I fully respect this distillery because bringing out, as their core range and having waited this amount of time to bring their first core range product out, about 6-7 years old. Obviously, Eddie Marshall Hazelburn is triple distilled. Surprised you forgot that, Andy. Yes, I should be surprised given I'm a Campbelltown freak in the Springbank. Yes, absolutely. Amazing product, Hazelburn. So Ben Riet as well.
Yeah, right. We had Rachel on last month. Last month? No, 2 weeks ago. Still in March.
Yeah, Mike Pizarro. Okay. Mike Pizarro's gone well ahead of us.
I was going to say, I'm very aware that we've cut your session short, Andy, because I've been gossiping away with Niamh early. But shall we bring Niamh back and start?
Well, I'm more worried about Niamh and her pint of Guinness that's waiting.
Exactly. It is St. Patrick's Day. We'll zip her back in. Hello. How are you doing?
I'm good. That was so awesome hearing like the cliff notes on Irish whiskey history. You did such an amazing job.
Yeah, I was at Teeling last week and they gave me the same spiel, so I just
happy days. You're like a sponge. You soaked it in. I love it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, I was very impressed. Lots of facts in your head. Lots of facts
in my head. I treat it like learning a song, which is the same. You compartmentalize it's the musician's brain, isn't it?
It was so good. It was so good.
Fabulous. We have had another question come in, actually, which I'll put to you in a second. But Andy, do you want to ask your meanest question of the month? And then we'll have a chat with Niamh about this question.
This is going to be a really hard one this time. Just for everyone, what were the first 3? Just so everyone remembers, because I want a fair...
You're putting me on the spot now because I don't have the drams in front of me. So we had, actually, I do have them in front of me. I'm going to give you the full things. We had Ben Riak, the Smoky 12, and Rachel came to speak to us. And we had Aberfeldy, 16-year-old, when I think it was India came to chat with us. And then we had Bren, Estate Cask, and we had the founder from Bren coming to have a chat. So we had... 3 very different drams last time, and now we've had our 2 Irish whiskies, if you need your memories refreshing. Yeah,
and then the ones from tonight. So if you needed that, those are the whiskies we had. And I'm going to ask a question, which one did you like the most from this month's box?
It's cruel. It's absolutely cruel.
It is cruel, but we all love it, really. It's so mean, but we all love it, really.
We love it. But while everyone is deciding, we have had now 2 questions come in, and then we might have to close the questions after this for the interest of time. But if you do have any other burning thoughts and remarks, get in touch with us at Pour and Sip, and we can always drop Niamh a line afterwards, or we can just get back to you. But so the 2 questions, we've got Jim's question and we've got the Reverend Kevin Wright's question. We'll do Jim first. Triple distilling sounds impressive, but does it not just extract more flavour? That is such a great question. I love a technical geeky question. Do you want to have an answer, Niamh?
I I don't know if I'm the best person to ask that question. I think as an Irish person, I have the natural penchant for triple distillation. I think it offers so much more of a fruitier characteristic to the spirit. However, I know a handful of other Irish producers right now, small distilleries, that are only doing double distillation because they feel that raw character is more representative of what a whiskey should taste like. So I like, Christy, what are your thoughts on it? Like,
So yeah,
how much do we care about it? I guess I say because maturation is like our game. So when it comes to the distillation, I don't lose much sleep about it. You know what I mean?
Exactly. I mean, I love questions like this. It makes me want to get my whiteboard out and do like a little diagram. So I will say I'm not a distiller and I'm not a chemist, but we do some of this on the WSET courses, which I've delivered before, which I love.
Yeah.
So I think when we're talking about distillation, the easiest way to think about it is, I won't go into too much detail because we could be here for another 3 hours and we've got pubs to get to. It's St. Patrick's Day. But every time you distill something, you are stripping out some flavor compounds, but only like the heaviest ones. You're absolutely in no way getting rid of them all. All you're really doing is selecting the more volatile ones. So you're almost like protecting those more volatile ones because you might want perhaps a lighter style whiskey or whiskeys that you're creating a cut, as they say in distillation, of very specific flavors. So even if you're distilling 3 times, you're still collecting those very precise sort of flavor compounds, we call them congeners, that you want. So it typically is lighter because you're stripping out some of the heavier ones, but there's still a lot of flavor packed in there. So for me, it's quite a textural thing as well. They sort of feel lighter on your palate, but there's still so much character going on in triple distilled. It's just it's a production choice, and it's a really interesting one.
Absolutely.
I'm just thinking about time because there are tons and tons of votes coming in here. Loads.
And okay, so Reverend Kevin Wright, we'll do a quick answer to this. I don't know if Andy and Niamh, this is another sciencey one. Is it phenols that give the burnt rubber taste? What effect does the number of distillations have on this? So I'll give a stab at answering this if anyone wants to add any more in again, and then we'll go to Andy for a quick roundup. You can do your sums, Andy. You can count up the votes while I'm attempting this one.
This time I could do an actual tally.
You can do an actual tally. So phenol compounds tend to come, in whiskey from peat. And these are these wonderful flavor compounds that when you're burning your peat, they cling to the grain. So yes, some of those come from phenols, but there are so many different types of flavor compounds out there. And you get them from fermentation. You get them from casks, as you said, Niamh, they come from everywhere. Some of these more sulfury ones will more typically come from like sort of the sherry casks. So I think what we've got in the Dingle, unless I'm very wrong, isn't going to be from peat. It's going to be from the cask, which is amazing.
Yes.
The question that you had about does distillation strip them out? Of course it does. Like it's stripping out some of those heavier ones. But if you're getting your flavors from your casks, that's post-distillation. So it's not going to affect it at all. If you were then, I don't know why you would, pains me, if you were going to redistill aged spirit, you'd strip them out again. But please don't ever do that.
That's not a thing, is it? Like, that can't be a thing.
No. Some rum producers, interestingly, will filter some colour out of their spirits afterwards, some of their aged spirits. But I've never heard of anyone doing it in whiskey, and I'd be very sad.
Yeah,
very sad.
That's not.
There's
on St. Patrick's Day.
Anybody thinking about starting distillery, there's a little message for you there from Christy the things not to do. I'm going to start. Jim Brannigan, JJ Corry, my favourite tonight. Good start there for you, Niamh. Ionis every time. Bren in capital letters. That was a weird one. I've got to be honest. That was really like nothing I'd ever tried before. I've got to be honest. I really enjoyed that. Joe F. Bren, Benrick 12, Aberfeldy 16, Tom Brannigan, Aberfeldy, Tom Brannigan, you voted. Oh, I see. Tom Brannigan again, Ben Ria, Tom Brannigan, Bren. Just go forward. Malcolm Tucker, Lasog tonight. Sorry, correct me again.
Lasog. I think you got it.
Smashed it all in one. Yeah. But Benrick for the month. Gareth Peters for me. It was the JJ Corry for the night, but Bren for the month. Ionis first, Bren, second, Benriach, third, Aberfeldy, Alistair, Bren, number 1, Lasog, number 2, El Sutton, Bren, your Uncle Vanya, Dingle, and JJ Corry, definitely. Short-term memory, I think, up your Uncle Vanya, or maybe it was just in general tonight was better. Green Tea is Green, Benriach, Ian Jambo Rain, number 1, JJ Corry, number 2, Benriach, third, Dingle, Simon, Lasog, Tom Brannigan, Lasog wins it for me tonight, Aberfeldy for the month. Ali C, Benriach, but JJ Corry a close second. Pat Cowling, Lasog without a doubt. Yes, absolutely. Chris Randall, Smoky 12 was my favourite. Pesho, number 1, Lasog, number 2, Bren, Simon Smith, Lasog, then Smoky 12. Kevin Wright, Reverend, sorry I didn't use your Reverend name pronoun there. I've already bought Bren because it was so different to the others I have. I totally agree with that. It was like nothing I'd tried before. I may need Lasog to go alongside it. Yes, please do head to the Pour and Sip store if you would like to buy one of these at a members discount. Mike Pizarro, happy to give an exclusive, but needs another 5 to 10 years on the rack. Mikhail Baghammer, great name. Bren, closely followed by Dingle. Barry Cullen, Lasog, Anthony Mullins. I drove home tonight thinking nothing could beat the Bren, and then I tried the Lasog. Without a doubt, the best. Christy, do you want to take over? Everyone must be so sick of the sounds of
Yes, I'm not going to do them all because we'll be here until Christmas, but thank you all for your tastings. We love them so much and all your comments. We've got a vote for the Lasog from Jonathan. We've got votes for the Bren. We've got Aberfeldy from Stuart. We've got Green Tea is Green saying Dingle, but sorry, Niamh, you're the most engaging guest of the month though. So that's a great shout.
Thank you.
Oh, Peter said Aberfeldy.
Honestly, the others
No, we've had an amazing roster of guests this month. It's so great. Bruce is sorry, St. Patrick, but Aberfeldy for me. Nigel Gain, I enjoyed all 5, but the best was the last one. Steve Hickson, JJ Corry and Bren. Matthew Simpson, it has to be Aberfeldy. Bren and Lasog tied for second. Eddie, Lasog was great, so drinkable. Jeffter. Niamh was my favourite tonight.
Correct answer.
Correct answer. I like it.
Nice.
Wowzers, what a night. I've had the best time. Happy St. Patrick's Day to us all. What a way to celebrate.
Yes. Amazing.
That was so much fun.
It was so good. Niamh, thank you so much for spending some of this really critical evening with us. It's been an absolute joy. So for anyone tuning in, I think I'm on a bit of a delay now. Sorry, my internet's given up. My internet's now too excited. But yes, thank you so much for coming along. I believe we'll be back on the 7th of April for more fun and games. Andy, you look confused.
Let me just check my calendar. Yep.
7th of April. And yeah, I am on a bit of a delay. Sorry if this, my internet suddenly died a death. But I think we'll leave it on that note. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. It's been amazing. We've loved all your tasting notes. We're literally too many to get through, but we do read them all. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Thank you for all your questions. And happy St. Patrick's Day. And cheers, Andy, and cheers, Niamh.
Cheers, everybody.